This is my favorite part.
Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are back this week with another panel conversation. This week we're featuring Julius Hernandez and Preya Samsundar. Julius serves as the Director of Advocacy for the Institute of Digital Humanity. He has been heavily involved in DFL politics, working on races for Minneapolis City Council, state legislature, and Congress. Preya is our resident Republican. She has worked for the MNGOP, the RNC, and various campaigns of all levels. Today, we will be covering topics all over the map. As we are just 41 days out from the election, we will start by breaking down recent polls, including one right here in Minnesota. We will hit on early voting being open in Minnesota and Taylor Swift's role in Minnesota's elections. We will discuss thoughts surrounding First Lady Jill Biden's apparently running a recent cabinet meeting. And we will end by breaking down what we can expect from next week's vice presidential debate. But I want to start the show with one last pitch for the MinnPost Festival, where the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be hosting our first in-person podcast. We will be joined by former state senator Michelle Benson and Minnesota Jobs Coalition Executive Director John Rouleau to discuss the challenges facing Republicans in Minnesota and explore why the GOP struggles statewide and what it will take to regain voter support and turn things around for Republicans in our state. The event is this Saturday, September 28th, downtown Minneapolis, and our episode will be live at 4:30. For those unable to make it in person, you will be able to listen to the podcast after the fact. Those hoping to attend but have yet to register, you can visit minnpost.com/festival and use the code BREAKDOWN, one word, to get the best rate possible. We hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. Hello, our esteemed panel. How is everyone doing today?
Good, yeah. Excited to be back.
Great. Well, we are certainly excited to have you all. We are going to kick things off with a recent poll here in Minnesota. Star Tribune, NPR, KARE 11 did a joint poll that was conducted from the 16th through the 18th of September. And it came out with Harris on top. Harris and Walz got 48% to the 43% lead, to 43% over Trump Vance. 7% of respondents remain undecided, and fewer than 2% said that they would vote for a third-party candidate. This is in line with the last poll that was in June with Biden and Trump, where I had Biden up by 4 as well. One of the things that I think is we are certainly in the time, 41 days out, enthusiasm is there on both sides. More than 90% of those polled claimed that they are either very enthusiastic or somewhat enthusiastic about their choice. And this is kind of something I think is a little bit different than what we had seen over the summer months, where there was still frustration on both sides of who was at the top of the ticket. Preya, you talked to Republican voters, you talked to voters of all stripes. Are you feeling this? People are ready to either cast their vote for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
I do. I mean, we talked a little bit about this the last time that, Will and I were on, is that, I do think that there is a little bit of an enthusiasm gap, whereas there is still a little bit more of that enthusiasm bump on the Democrats' side. I think, again, some of that has waned a little bit, especially after the first debate, where we saw a lot of non-answers from Kamala Trump. We saw, from Kamala Harris, good Lord, and then saw a lot of unusual answers and an unusual posture from Donald Trump. That did give to some extent answers, but was really all over the place. I do think that a lot of Americans are probably just ready for this to be over with. I think a lot of Americans want solutions and they want answers. Obviously, I think this is a presidential election that will go down in the history books as one of the most unusual, unhinged presidential elections of our lifetime. But I do think that people are just ready for some real answers. They're really ready for answers. And that's something that we just haven't really gotten from either side at the moment. I think we've heard a lot of policy stances. I think, the Trump campaign has done a better job of of giving answers on how they're going to solve a lot of the problems. I think for Republicans, it's a little bit easier this time around because we do have something to run against. We have the Biden-Harris administration, and there are 4 years of record failure. A lot of Americans, a lot of Minnesotans are very unhappy with what's transpired over the last 4 years. And things were arguably very good under Donald Trump's 4 years,
Come
first term.
on.
Hey, there's a lot of people that will look at their kids' college funds. They look at their 401ks. They look at their retirement funds. They're looking at a lot of things, and they will tell you point blank. I think probably you could even say it, Michael, that your like economic like future was a lot better under Donald Trump than it was under the Biden-Harris administration. You might not like his policies. You might not like the fact that he talks about, you know,
There's no
people
way I
eating
can make that claim.
dogs and cats in
Dogs and
Ohio
cats.
and whatnot. But they will think back to the first term, and they will think back to what did their checkbook look like? What did their savings account look like? What did their retirement funds look like? What did the stock market look like? Can they say that their life was better under those 4 years than the last 4 years? Most Americans, 9 out of 10 will tell you yes.
And I think we actually will chat a little bit further about this because that comes up in an NBC poll that I want to get into. I do want to stay here on Minnesota just for a quick moment because there are a few things of note that I think are important to discuss. But Julius, I want to give you a chance. Obviously, on the Democratic side, you've been on the campaign trail working on a primary race just most recently. Are you feeling that from your side? The folks really, now that it is moved over to Harris, we're past the convention, we got the first debate down. Democrats are as jazzed as it appears for Harris and to get there to the polls to cast their ballot for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I think the people that were probably, soft on Biden, but we're going to vote for him because they just really hate Trump are enthusiastic now and willing to be involved. I'd probably put myself in that category, and I think I know a lot of people that were in that same category as well. And I think it shows from post Biden dropping out to Kamala being the nominee, Minnesota was in play. Like the Trump campaign was about to start spending a lot more money here because they thought it was based off of polling with Biden. And then Kamala gets into the race. And now, it's a 5-point race based off of this poll. So I think, from a grassroots standpoint, there are a lot more people on the DFL side that are much more engaged and excited about being a part of the process of getting her elected. And I think a part of that too comes with not only Kamala being like a historic nominee, but Walz being the VP nominee and, having some of that home state connections, I think really has energized the base, at least on a statewide level. And I think has really given a lot of independents some hope that they don't have to vote for two close to 80-year-old men. And I think, just to end with this thought, Frank Luntz, like one of the greatest pollsters ever. I really love his work. He said the first campaign to get rid of their 80-year-old nominee was going to win. And I think that the race in this state specifically too has dramatically shifted in favor of Democrats. Whereas again, just a month and a half ago, the state was in play generally for Republicans, at least on the presidential level. And now it's probably unlikely not. So yeah.
Michael, you're caught a little bit between both worlds here, being a Republican with a Republican past, but voting for Kamala Harris and being open about your support for the vice president. Do you feel that 5 points is accurate, more or less? Where's your thought on the matter?
I always want my, independent of how I'm voting, I always want my analysis to be fair. I think Preya and Julius brought up some really good points. I think they really do. And that's one of the advantages of having smart people on the podcast is because I think that they're offering very good analysis as to where the race is. But for someone like me, who's a Republican, but who wants there to be is supporting Harris and Walz, I think I would be surprised if it's a 5-point race in the state. I think it's a little outside of that. I think that for Republicans to succeed in this state overall, I'd like to see Republicans succeed in some areas. They need the margin to be close. And so I think it's good because aside from how I'm voting on my ballot, I believe in a two-party system. I want there to be a vibrant two-party. And, Preya knows that because I mean, we talked about that extensively. That's why it's so great having her on this podcast along with Julius, is because Preya is an absolute, just can throw out those good points. And she's been consistent on that. I'd like Republicans to succeed. So I do think I would be surprised on election day if it was less than 5 points in Minnesota. I still think Harris is ahead in the state. I would venture to say it's probably 5 to 10 points, probably closer to 10. I would honestly be surprised if on election day, if it was more than double digits in Minnesota. I still believe if I was a betting person, and I kind of am sometimes, I think it's probably around somewhere in that 5 to 10 range, maybe 7 or 8. And that's a good spot for, I think, Republicans to be. Because if you get outside more of that 10 range, it's tough for Republicans to pick up some seats when the top of the ticket is failing at that rate.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm going to a little bit. I tend to agree. I do, Preya and I were deep on the ground in 2020. We're going to chat about ground game here in Minnesota and nationwide in a little bit, but the Trump apparatus in Minnesota in 2020 was robust. It was thriving. It was huge and across the state and had so many paid staff, trained staff, offices, so much of an investment in the state, and still lost by 7 points. And so it is hard for me to believe that at this point, it's going to be closer than it was in 2020 in Minnesota. But we've seen crazier things. So who am I to say? Yeah.
To that point, though, can I just ask a question back? Isn't it possible that because John Rouleau made this statement, and I don't want to assign this to Preya too, but I think Preya made too, there is a possibility because Walz being on the ticket that it energizes Republicans. So I would throw back and say, is it possible that the margin could be closer, even though there's maybe less physical apparatus, meaning offices and staff, that what's ginned up is it's ginned up Republicans a bit. And the fact that Walz is on the ballot might give them Republicans a bit of a double enthusiasm. Just something I throw out there.
Well, Preya, I'll let you go into this because I think it speaks especially to your economic points.
Well, I think that, but I think also, Becky, you might have this poll, so I'm sorry if I'm coming at you here, but there was a new poll that came out and it specifically polled how do people view Walz's role in the 2020 riots. And so the only group when you look at it from a geographical perspective, the only group that had a positive viewing of that were folks in Minneapolis and St. Paul. They were the only ones that viewed Walz's involvement in that favorably. When they looked at the suburbs, it dropped by double digits. And so I think that could be a key place for Republicans, especially down ballot, to do well, is to latch onto that. And take advantage of that. And that also could make a difference for top of the ticket. To Michael's point, and Becky's point, Trump did come very close in 2016. What was it? 44,000 votes, 1.4%. That was because we had a strong third party candidate that took about 7 points, 5 to 6 points off the ballot. We didn't have that in 2020. Lost that. That's why Trump lost by 7 points. If it's not anywhere within a 4 to 7 point range, I wouldn't be surprised.
I think that is very telling. I mean, we just had Speaker Mike Johnson here at the 3rd Precinct with Joe Tayrab and Fishbach and a couple other members of Congress or candidates. So it certainly seems as though that's a message that Republicans are going to latch onto. Whether they have the money and infrastructure to actually do anything with that, time will tell. I do want to hit on a couple other things on this poll before we move on to the NBC poll. I think what we're seeing pretty consistently across all of the polls is when it comes to issue respondents support, believe Trump is the best fit for the economy and border, and Harris is the best fit for protecting democracy and abortion. That's been time and time again on these polls coming out of debates. I don't think that's any surprise. One thing I was really surprised about, however, well, 2 things. First, when we look at the geographic breakdown, no surprise. When we look at Hennepin and Ramsey County, Harris comes out on top at 64% and Trump Vance at 28%. That's not a surprise. Similarly, when we look at rural Minnesota, Trump is in the lead by double digits there. When we look at the rest of the metro, though, it has Harris and Walz at 43% and Trump Vance at 48%. This was shocking to me because this is something Michael and I have been talking about for the last 2 years, that suburban women and suburban parents in general are going to be big decision makers. And I was surprised that Trump Vance came out on top about 5% here. Julius, with your work in the Ramsey, Hennepin Ramsey areas and with your conversations in the suburbs, were you surprised that Trump Vance are in the lead when it comes to respondents from the metro area?
Yeah, I mean, I hate being the person that's like, I usually hate people that are like, I don't trust polls. And I'm not, that's not what I'm going to say. Cause I do generally think that they've become fairly accurate since 2016 for the most part. I don't know that I entirely think that that's going to hold up. Right. I think you made a good point. We have 41 days, so that's not a lot of time. But I think that when you look at how Harris is doing with women, how Harris is doing with people of color, and some of those key and suburban women specifically, I think there's a little bit more room for growth for her because she's not as well known. And I think the other bright spot for the campaign, and one thing that they have to really focus on, is generally the polls that we've seen don't attach her to the policies of Biden. People don't overwhelmingly blame her for some of those decisions that were made. And I think that she has a ton of room for growth in the metro area. And like I said, 48 for Trump in the metro, like greater metro outside of Hennepin and Ramsey, and kind of that, those outer ring suburbs and middle ring, is a little shocking to me. But I think, if that were actually the case, I think that she has a lot more room for growth with people that she needs to win over, specifically suburban women. And Trump has a very low ceiling. And I think that you'll see maybe a shift in that the last, month or so. I think we'll see a difference in that for sure.
Michael, before we move on to NBC, any thoughts on that metro number or also the independent split? Independents in this poll come out again for Trump at 43% for Trump, 41% for Harris. Thoughts?
I think that I think Trump's numbers are baked. Meaning, I think that this is a guy who, let's look at some of the events of the last few months. When some of his legal challenges have happened, his poll numbers haven't budged much. And so what I think is that his numbers are at a point, and this is someone who I don't think there was a time when Trump was ever president that he polled over 50%. He's always hovering around. What he got in 2020 was 46.8. That's the highest number he's ever gotten. Nationally is 46.8. I understand there's 50 state elections. It's not a national election. I get all that stuff, but I think there is more room for Harris to gain than I think there is for Trump, because I think that's the race here. And that's, I think, what it comes down to is do people feel comfortable voting for Harris? Because I find it very unlikely that there are a lot of voters out there who are truly undecided on Trump. I think what they're deciding is, will they vote for Trump? Or what I really think the movement is whether they're undecided on Harris. And so if Harris is able to close it in the last 40 some days of the election and make that persuasion argument with a disciplined message, I think that campaign has more of a likelihood to pick things up.
When we look at the NBC poll, it's very similar, 5-point lead for the Harris-Walz ticket. But one thing that I would like to chat a little bit about and hear from Preya, because somebody who maybe doesn't look at Harris as favorably as the other two, Harris's favorability has jumped 16 points since July. The poll said, or this article said, the largest increase for any politician in NBC News polling history. It had, prior to this, was President George W. Bush standing after that. It surged after the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
That's what I wanted to hear.
It's wild. 16 points in 3 months is a pretty significant number. It is as people are getting to know her more. However, one thing I tend to agree with Preya on here is that we haven't had the opportunity to hear from her as much, to have folks maybe what they've seen in the debates, what they've seen in the rare media appearances and interviews are favorable things. We haven't seen the missteps. We haven't seen the gaps. We haven't seen the stumbles. So is that the reason, Preya? I guess I'm teeing it up for what I kind of expected you to come at here.
No, you're 100% accurate. And look, the reality is that Kamala Harris will get a different level of treatment from the press than any other candidate will. And this is something that I battled even when I was working for Nikki Haley, because when in 2020, I'll use this as an example. I was working for Trump down in Iowa, you know, got to witness that whole thing pretty much from start to finish, in the lead up to the Iowa caucuses. And the one thing you would see constantly is the level of favorability that you would see national news outlets come out with. So it would be stories that talked about Kamala Harris coming up from nothing, coming up from a daughter of immigrants, talking about how Indian communities and Black communities and Jamaican communities felt heard or seen. You're seeing stories about how the small community in India where her mother came from is so excited to see. Like, these are the kind of puff piece stories that you would, one, never see for a Republican, but two, also never see just generally for a political candidate. And so I think when you have those level of like puff piece stories coming out, while at the same time Kamala and Walz are not doing interviews at all. They've done one interview basically since she got into this race. She's not talking about the issues, and nobody is taking her to task over the issues that she did choose to adopt in the 2020 presidential campaign when she ran and was trying to take to get voters and get support when she was running in the Iowa caucuses. The fact that no one's coming back to those or holding her accountable for the fact that she has been vice president for the last 4 years, and she is just as responsible as Joe Biden for the downfall that this country has faced in the last 4 years. When you have all those things come together, it's no wonder she is 16 points up from July.
I want to make a quick pitch that if you are only listening to this and not watching it, I encourage you to watch us on our live streams because the facial reactions right now from Michael and Julius are spot on. One pushback I'm going to, before I send it over to Julius, is I will say I do think that it's Republicans' failures to not be able to accurately tie her to Joe Biden. I think we're as Republicans,
100%.
I think we're failing on that right now. That's our job. That's not their job. The lack of interviews, done a little bit more than one, but is still a frustration of mine. But Julius, talk to us a little bit about where you think this favorability jump comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of things, right? First, it's who she is, right? She's the first major nominee for a party that's a Black woman, and an Indian American, South Asian woman. And so I think, yeah, of course you're going to have puff pieces, right? But that's natural, that it just is what it is. And it kind of like comes along with the identity she holds. And not to say that's good or bad, but I think I would say it's a little odd to make the claim that she's getting like some sort of better treatment. Cause I mean, I think, I watch CNN every day and they're always talking about how she never does interviews, which, is I don't think is a failure in her campaign. I actually think it's quite smart, right? Like, she doesn't need we have 41 days. She does not need to go out there and say something that is going to take up a news cycle for 2 or 3 of those days. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't think she would, right? But when it comes to policy, let her do that on her website. Let her go to these events and talk to these key groups of people, union workers, and let her do that. And she doesn't need to talk to the media, right? Like, it doesn't, I don't think it helps her in any way. I think it benefits her that she's running more of a campaign that's just, rallies and going to these like key events. But I will say too, it's really hard to compare Kamala Harris, who generally does not have a ton of moral failings, to Donald Trump, who constantly takes up news cycles because of the things he says that are offensive, aggressive, inappropriate. When he has rallies where he talks about sharks and batteries and water, that's probably going to be more of a worthy like news piece, right? But I do agree with Preya that she should be answering questions, right? She should be looking, even if it's local media, go to these local news outlets, go to these swing states and talk to these local media news outlets and tell them what your plans are. Make small videos that you can put up on the website and Twitter talking about, this is what I want to do. But I think that the notion that she's getting special treatment from the press at an overwhelming rate is actually, I would push back against and say, is not a fair representation of what I would say is happening. But you know, I see it in a different light. I like her. I have her as my phone background. I have her and Tim Walz on my phone screen. So, you
God
know,
bless you.
I do
Adorable.
my very best. But like, you know, it's like I think someone who is indicted on 31 counts and can't keep his mouth shut
34.
to save his 34, sorry. Like can't keep his mouth shut to save his life and constantly says things like dogs are getting eaten in this small town in Ohio. Like, are you going to cover Kamala Harris just going to an event, or are you going to cover him saying something really stupid like that? So, you know, I think it's fair what Preya is saying about Harris in some sense, but I don't think it's entirely accurate.
I will just throw back to this real quick, though.
How dare you?
She's just 5 points ahead, and if all of what you're saying is true, you're talking about the indictments and everything he said, and she's only 5 points, that tells me just how bad the Democrats' message actually is. That's number 1. 2, I would say that for Donald Trump's entire life, he has spent time saying ridiculous things, and I think it's just become nature of the beast. And so, for a lot of folks, I don't think that they're necessarily contemplating whether or not they like Kamala as a person or not. Like, a lot of people liked Obama, but they didn't like his policies. And I think that's what it comes down to is like, are they, and I've heard this said many times by both Republicans and Democrats, are they comfortable with bad orange man tweeting unnecessarily things that they may not care for, but uh have good policies that actually uplift their families and move them forward? That's, I think, the big crux of all of this at the end of the day.
Michael, I know you were jumping under your skin about this 16-point jump, comparing it to Bush post 9/11.
There's
Go
a lot
for
of
it.
things I need to address. Number one, how dare you? No, let me say this. First of all, Preya, it's you throw the heat every show, and so it's physically impossible for me not to react in some ways, like writhe in my seat or get upset when you're saying stuff because you're so good at what you do. So if I sat here like a zombie, then I think you should be disappointed because Becky says stuff where I literally want to throw stuff off the wall because it's so outrageous, particularly when we're talking about food takes. That's why I had to redo my office because their food takes were so garbage. So Preya, please take it as a compliment that as you're speaking, I'm like, geez, I don't want to get so angry. Okay. So that being said, do you want to know why there's a 16-point bump? Because people like her, because she's a likable person. And you want to know why there's the disparity is when you nominate someone who wants to talk about dogs and cats being eaten, who goes on a debate stage and talks about and praises Hannibal Lecter. When he does the type of stuff, that's not going to be successful with the media. And that's what I discussed before. Trump's popularity is peaked nationally at 46.8%. I don't believe, and I'll open it up for comment. I'll open it up for people to fact check me. I do not believe there was a time when Donald Trump ever served as president that his approval rating was over 50%. And having listened to a number of episodes where Preya talked about stuff, I know this. I'm smart on this because I listen to Preya. You nominate a popular candidate, you can do a better job at winning elections. Here's the other point I would make to you. And as folks I've mentioned before in the podcast, I have a pretty consistent cycle of going through CNN, MSNBC, and Fox on a pretty regular schedule. So I can get balanced news. Sorry, I don't listen to One American News, Preya. I know it's where you get all your news from. And so my point is that there's been a lot of discussion about these interviews. What the Harris-Walz campaign is doing is they're doing a lot of local media. They're doing a lot of individual interviews. Sure, they're not doing national interviews, the expectation. But let me point out to you something. The reason why, and Trump is doing a lot of that stuff. You want to know why? Because he's a terrible messenger. Because it's always clean up in aisle 3. He does the media one day, he doesn't stand message, and so he has to clean it up. It is ridiculous that Trump has to do the amount of interviews that he does, and it's not making an impact. You want to know why? Because he can't stay on message. And we did a podcast episode a little while back talking about what some of the Republican message could be. And I'm not trying to help out Democrats, but if you go back and listen to the archives and flag any episode that Preya is on, you'd probably get some pretty good message as to what they should be talking about. I'm not going to help them out too much. But the point I'm saying is the reason why the vice president and Governor Walz are able to do more local interviews is because they can stay on message and they're disciplined. One other point I'd want to make to you. If the Republicans want Harris to be to be analyzed on a national stage, their candidate shouldn't be being chicken and not participating in debates. The absolute best way for Kamala Harris's policies to be vetted on the national stage is by having Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, on stage with her. And that's the frustration you should have right now, is that Donald Trump has said he's not debating again. And there are 40 some days between now and the election, plenty of time for there to be a presidential debate. And that would, I think, provide the best opportunity. So if Republicans are mad, here's what I'd say. Endorse and nominate candidates that can stand message. Have a running mate that's value added, that doesn't push conspiracy theories like dogs and cats are being eaten, and do more disciplined message and agree to debate. And then things could maybe change for you.
I will take an opportunity, but Julius, I know you have a comment you want to share.
Oh, and let me also say, it's very clear that Becky and Preya colluded before this episode, and they shared talking points. So we're going to talk about that off air.
All I will say is that Preya and I were both jointly supportive of Nikki Haley to take down President Donald Trump.
I voted for her too.
I'm just saying that we are on your side of Republicans should have supported a better candidate and had a better presidential candidate. So just want to say, I think we're all in agreement that Donald Trump is not the best nominee for the Republican ticket right now. But Julius, you had something to share.
Yeah, and to just piggyback off two things that Michael said, talking about, no, I'm adding, we're colluding now. No, I just to
can't
just
say
to
it
add,
on
like,
air.
Oh,
now
gosh,
you just said that we're colluding. You got to be quiet about the colluding.
Oh gosh, Russiagate. So okay, so the first thing I wanted to piggyback off of is Michael made a good point. They're doing local media. Whatever people lie and say this is a national race, it is not. It is Pennsylvania, it is Michigan, it is Arizona, and that is it. Right? Those are the people that need to hear these messages and need to hear from the campaigns the most frequently. And I would say the Harris campaign is doing a really good job of sending their surrogates there, putting her in places where she needs to be, and using walls to do messaging in those states. So it's like, I don't need it. Like, Minnesota doesn't need to hear Kamala Harris more because she's probably going to win the state, and she's going to win it by a healthy margin, right? She's going to win California. It doesn't matter if they hear her there, right? So I think that your resources best spent with 41 days left, and at the time when she started, however many 60, 70 days, is to do it in the states that matter the most. She cannot win unless she wins Pennsylvania, and she has spent a ridiculous amount of time there since she's become the nominee, and so it makes sense for her to continue to do that local media. And I understand the distaste for that, but it really isn't a national race. I think at this point it's a couple of states. And then the other part I wanted to touch on was that the reason Trump doesn't want to debate is because he's bad at it. He used to be good. I used to love watching Donald Trump at debates, even though I can't stand him, because he was a good debater and he made people look dumb. This time, though, she has done what no one else could do, and she baited him every single time. And he is not a good messenger. He doesn't listen to his campaign staff, and he is bad for Republicans up and down the ticket in terms of messaging. And I think that they're taking advantage of the fact that he can eat up news cycles by saying dogs and cats are getting eaten, and Royce White calling himself an anti-Semite, right? Like, they can piggyback off of that by just being, quiet and letting them show the American people who they are individually, not representations of all Republicans, but who they are and what kind of leaders they would be on that side of the aisle. So I think that that's important too, is like, is not a national race. It really isn't. So it really doesn't matter at the end of the day for us, like in this state,
Just two quick things, if I could just say.
I knew it.
One, on the debate front, it's easy to, like, quote unquote, win a debate when it's 3 against 1. We've already had this discussion, so we're not going to get back into it. Two, just to say this real quick, there's a difference between Royce White and Donald Trump. One, Donald Trump can get media, Royce White can't. So I'm just going to end it at that.
Hey, we agree there. I mean,
Becky, you're not. I don't know where Becky went.
Sorry, I knocked out my charger again and light went off, and it's been a whole little bit of chaos over here. Moving us into, I want to chat a little bit about ground game. We hit on it a little bit briefly, but Minnesota at one point was on the list in play, right? I mean, this was something that the Trump campaign had said, maybe not in play across the board. The Trump campaign had said we were on the periphery. We were kind of second tier of states that they thought that they could make some inroads. Now there's some interesting claims here. So reading some articles and doing some prep for this, it appears that the Trump campaign claimed that there are 13 offices in Minnesota. Feel free to disagree if you want to. My understanding, those are BPOU offices that have Trump signs, have Trump literature, and certainly have volunteers doing Trump work along with up and down the ticket. The Republican Party did recently say that it's trained 1,400 Trump Force volunteer captains, with 400 of them just trained in the last couple of weeks. Again, I feel like this is folks certainly going to Republican Party trainings, ready to door knock up and down the ballot. I just don't see the infrastructure on the Trump side. Before I move on to DFL, anybody disagree?
Can I ask a question before Preya
Sure.
jumps in? Again, I've endorsed Harrison Walls. I will have to tell you, but I want to be as fair as I can. I think that would count as an office. I mean, if I'm at a loss to figure out. I mean, there's a lot of times that the party had offices that would count as an office. Is the claim that because they're a BPOU office, they're not actually a storefront political office? Like
They're
it's
not paid for.
They're
Or-
not part of the actual infrastructure that
Okay.
was meant to roll out.
Okay. So
with paid staff that are paid by the Trump team. So like in 2020, we certainly had offices whose rent and utilities were paid by the Trump team, whose staff were paid by the Trump team, and who were obviously still did have down ballot literature and did function with the joint BPOUs. I think it's just a matter of kind of logistics of who's, whether it's Trump stuff at a BPOU office or BPOU stuff at a Trump office.
I mean, I want Trump to lose. I want him to lose every state, but I want to be fair. I would consider that to be an office that they could use, but that's potato to potato.
They certainly can use it. I think my argument here is that I don't believe that the Trump campaign, Trump National, has sent any thousands of dollars into the state of Minnesota to support having these offices. I think those offices would exist regardless. Whereas on the DFL side, the Harris campaign has 24 paid offices with 100 paid staffers in the state of Minnesota. That's significant.
Oof.
That's very significant.
In comparison to what you both saw in 2020, that's a contrast.
2020 was very impressive in Minnesota. I was executive director of the state party at that time. What the Trump campaign had in the state, Kevin Poindexter was the state director. What they did on a daily, weekly basis in terms of numbers of texts and phone calls and doors was a full-fledged presidential campaign on the ground in Minnesota.
And Preya, you're everywhere. Is what you're seeing what are you seeing in the states? Do you have any context you could provide?
I mean, I know what they have in other states. So in Wisconsin, they have a state director. I mean, they have a state director here as well, but they actually have paid field staff. Well, I guess the problem is that in 2024, just to like come back a little bit, it's very different from 2020 when the RNC had an entire infrastructure that they had built. They had created this based off of OFA, which was, Obama's ground game that they had built in 2012 for his reelection. Republicans had taken that, perfected it, started in 2014, had built it out to a point where, you could drop in, a state director, RFDs, field staff, and have a full-fledged statewide operation with offices, everything. All of that got scrapped when they booted Rana. And they cleared house at the RNC in DC at headquarters. All of that got completely decimated. So that doesn't exist anymore. Essentially what they've done is that they've taken what should have been that infrastructure for a field program and they have co-opted it in some fashion for election integrity. And so that's what a lot of this now is that infrastructure. To Becky's point, I think we spent 20 million in Minnesota or something like that in 2020. I don't think they were even planning to spend 5. I mean, I don't know. I haven't had those conversations with folks, but I couldn't imagine that they were going to even spend 5 in Minnesota, even when they were planning to roll things out.
And then you guys So then you went like right after the election, right to January 6th. Did you guys just all go out together? Were you all like in a caravan when you took over the Capitol? How did that? Did you guys just, was there per diems? How did that work? Just
I was
joking.
actually in the middle of construction in my house when that was playing
Okay.
on TV.
I know no one was at the incident.
For the record, I quit.
Okay,
Before
I just
election day
wanted to be clear.
2020.
I'm just
Yeah, I
cracking a
was
joke.
I'm
done.
not going to get into it, but
Yes.
Done in November.
Yes. Okay.
We were unemployed.
Right. Do you want to move on to, because this is kind of what we're seeing nationally as well. Trump campaign, there are concerns of the lack of Trump infrastructure in the ground game. And it seems a lot to be leaning on the Elon Musk America PAC canvassers. And now this is a change from what has been allowed. There's a recent, I think, FEC ruling that allows this joint collaborative effort for candidates' campaigns and outside groups to directly coordinate their canvassing efforts with super PACs, which is kind of still wild to me of how separate they had to be in the past, but they can share lists and data and all sorts of things that's collected in their canvassing efforts. And so the word on the street is that the America PAC is out in Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, obviously those top key states. The PAC has paid canvassing firms more than $14 million. And one thing before we chat about the Harris efforts on the ground, which again, significant nationwide, is a new, as I was reading this, is a tactic of the Trump campaign right now targeting low propensity voters. So those less likely to show up and votes, rare voters. What are our thoughts on this? Julius, you were just on the ground. I assume a lot of times in your work, we know that we often target the folks who vote our party, vote all the time, and are going to show up at the polls if they're supporting our person. Thoughts on targeting those low propensity voters? Is it because, like you said, Trump does have a lower ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I will say, right, I've been an organizer most recently. That was really what I was doing, was focusing on organizing work. And I think it's an interesting tactic. I don't know that it's worth the money when you're getting outspent by the other campaign. So, Kamala and Tim Walz's campaign is outspending Trump advance in pretty much every swing state by a significant margin, except Pennsylvania. I don't know that it's going to hold much weight. I could be totally wrong, right? But I think we all know that a lot of the reason a lot of campaigns don't spend money on low propensity voters is because it costs more to get less. And so I think it'd be interesting, though, right, for a race this close in some of those swing states to see if you can up the voter turnout among low propensity voters. And one of the things, not jumping ahead, but just kind of to hit on the Harris and Walz campaign, is they actually have an office literally from my window right here. I can see it. And I live in like North Minneapolis, which historically never gets invested in pretty much any races because of how low propensity we are, specifically in this ward of the city. And so I think it's a really interesting strategy. I don't know that it'll pay off. I think historically that all of our campaign knowledge would say that it otherwise is not a smart strategy. But again, in a race so close, it could be the determining factor. And I think that I would like to see if Harris and Walz are doing the same thing, to see if there's maybe some proof behind the pudding that that's actually a viable strategy this time around.
Before I get to Michael's smirks that he's making, I want to give him some more ammo by Preya letting you have the floor on the low propensity voters. Dollars spent per vote here is significantly higher than going towards those reliable votes, but they do need to bring in new voters. And in 2016, we saw that be successful for Trump, right?
Absolutely. And I think even before Rana was unceremoniously, let go, that is something that the RNC was trying to move towards. You kind of saw it with their bank the vote, now swamp the vote kind of campaign that they're pushing forward right now, which is trying to get those high propensity. So I'll get a little inside baseball here, the 4 out of 4 voters, the ones you can reliably count on to vote every presidential. They'll go to every primary. They'll vote in every primary for non-presidential years and general elections, making sure that those folks are going out. They're casting early ballots, whether it's in person or absentee, getting them out the door so they can focus on these low propensity voters. That's something that the RNC was shifting towards even when I was there in 18 and 20. And so I think that's something that they have been trying to do for the last couple of cycles, because to your point, Becky, it is those low propensity voters, the ones that maybe come out that need a little bit of a nudge. Those are the ones that get them across the finish line in key areas, and it can help make the difference down ballot as well. And so I do think that it is an interesting strategy. It's a strategy that has worked for them in key races in the past. And it'll be interesting to see how, especially in the current environment from an infrastructure standpoint that the Trump campaign has found themselves in, how that will work. But it is something that has proven to work for Republicans before. It's something that's worked well for Trump himself. And I think if they're able to execute on it, it should pay off. Whether or not that translates to victory is a whole nother conversation. But
Michael, you've been around the game for a long time. Those low propensity voters, not the most reliable. What do you think about that?
I think she just called you old, Michael. I don't know.
I did. She did.
It was
Yes.
very kind.
I can't believe I'm saying this. I agree with everything Preya said. I think it makes sense. And I would also say to you, as someone who wants Republicans to succeed, I like the contrast that Preya offered in explaining it, because I think it's one of those kind of simple kind of blocking and tackling, balls and strikes type things that need to happen. I think it's important to do. What I was actually giggling at the beginning was Julius described himself as a community organizer, and it reminded me of the greatest sign I ever saw at a political event, because during the 2008 race, President Obama was known as the community organizer, and I was at an event in Minnesota, and I think the sign had appeared in other parts of the country, but I was at an Palin event, and someone had a sign that said Charles Manson was a community organizer too. And that's seared into my brain, and every time I hear the phrase community organizer, I just giggle. And I have to be better because we're now live streaming these. And all of those teachers that I had growing up that said I was rambunctious and couldn't stay in my seat, it's not happening on it's not happening on a live stream, because I just can't. I can't. It's just like I want to punch the screen. I want to get mad at Preya. I want to throw stuff off the wall, and I simultaneously want to giggle. So I got to do a better job. That's why I was giggling. Community organizer, because
I love it.
Describing himself like Charles Manson.
Yeah, we're one and the same, basically.
Headline: Michael
Yes.
Brodkorb compares podcast
Yes.
guest to Charles Manson.
Yep.
I want to give some props to the Harris campaign. They certainly are
Fantastic.
have a very robust ground game, 320 offices, more than 2,000 paid staff. A little bit different on this side. Their outside groups are spending a lot of money on the advertising side. They are on track to spend nearly 175 million more than Trump's campaign. So not just 175 million, 175 million more than Trump's campaign. And so far has outspent 2-1 since she entered the race. Michael.
I want to be responsible with the use of this platform to push my personal agenda. But there is one thing I wanted to note, which was I do think that and I think it's something we could talk about. What I'm interested about from the grassroots perspective is the amount, and there's been a pretty consistent, steady drip, and maybe we could talk about it at a later point, about Republicans, conservatives that are voting for Harris. And I throw it out not to be argumentative, but to see, is there any comparable effort on the Trump side? And I'm doing that not to be a smartass, but purely informational, because I do think some of that grassroots stuff is helpful. Is there some of that type of coalition stuff that's happening on the other side? Because I just haven't seen it get much traction.
I think all the coalition stuff got scrapped when the RNC did.
Okay.
I mean, because they did have a very, Becky can attest to this, very robust coalitions movement, an entire strategic initiatives department that was focused on literally putting offices in downtown Milwaukee geared towards Hispanic voters and Black voters, putting Hispanic office in Omaha, putting Jewish offices, I think, throughout the Northeast, I think in Pennsylvania, in New York. I'm trying to think of what else. We had veterans, LGBTQ, I'm trying to think of what else.
In addition to even the offices, they did a lot of themed bus tours. We did had big Asian American weeks, and Elaine Chow would come out, be on bus tours, going to places where we spent a lot of time in North St. Paul, making sure going into those communities, having those conversations, having the interviews. It was a really big thing in 2020. The sportsmen, the veterans, the college students, the faith organizations. It was a really big part, and I think it's a really important part. I think that a lot of times, especially when you also look at some low propensity voters, finding that hook that's going to be how they connect to a candidate or a party, I think is a really important thing just in any sort of organizations, from the party infrastructure to candidates. It's a way to show that they can find a similar. Everybody wants a community, right? Everybody wants to find some folks that are like them for a reason. And it doesn't always come down to a policy fact. It comes down to people who have similar values from their faith or from their upbringing in an immigrant household, whatever that might look like. So I do think it's really important. I don't think we're seeing that currently from the Trump campaign or from the RNC. And as Preya has alluded to, there's been a lot that has gone on with the RNC and Rana leaving and everything kind of being a little bit in shambles there. Any last thoughts on ground game before we move on?
I'm good.
All right. I want to make one quick plug. We're running, conversation's been too good, so we're running a little late on time, and I want to make sure we leave a good chunk of time to talk about debate preview. So I just want to make one quick plug. We talked already about early voting open in Minnesota. You can go to minnesotavotes.gov to find out your voter status, to register, to request your ballot, all of the good things. We also talked about Taylor Swift and her endorsement of the Harris campaign and the voter registration flurry that came from that. One thing I just wanted to plug that Secretary of State Steve Simon in his office came out with recently is between September 9th and September 12th, so post-debate, post-Taylor Swift endorsement, in those 3 days, the Secretary of State's office recorded 20,000 new registrations to vote in Minnesota. On that September 12th date, the 2 days after the debate, 13,000 people completed their registration one day. In the week prior, the Secretary of State's office got 1,300. So tenfold, 10,000 more people after the Taylor Swift and her push, because her big thing, obviously, in supporting Harris was go register to vote. And she subsequently did that on the VMA stage. She's done that and multiple times. And I just think, regardless of whether you like her politics, like her endorsing, whether you believe that celebrities should endorse political opponents, I applaud anybody who chooses a reason to get registered to vote. And hopefully, whether all or even 5% of those folks actually show up and vote in November, it's a win across the board. So I think that's pretty impressive.
Do you maybe want to apologize for some past remarks?
Oh no, I still stand by that.
Fantastic. I knew you would.
100%.
Fantastic. I knew you would. I'm so proud of you.
100%. But I also will say that of those 20,000, how many of them were actually just 18-year-olds that were probably going to elections or that were going to register day of, right? Like, are these actual like new voters, or are they new voters because they're like it's their first time to vote?
I always love the skepticism, Preya.
Yes,
always.
Hey,
I
and
mean, there are also Republicans that love Taylor Swift that also probably went and registered to vote as well because of it. So, I mean, whatever their reason, like, I'm going to guess that those 20,000 were probably going to register to vote at some point. Taylor Swift probably just gave them the bump to do it beforehand.
I feel like we need like a sad trombone noise here.
As the resident DFLer and Preya as the resident Republican, we can agree that the healthy skepticism about Taylor Swift is warranted. So I agree.
I'll take it.
I agree.
Whatever the reason,
I'm a
20,000
hater.
people voted or registered.
I'm a Taylor Swift hater, but I agree.
Oh, really? Well, I'm going to give you the same advice. May God have mercy in your soul, because I'm surprised Preya hasn't been taken out for her last comment that she made. I would not want to make Taylor Swift mad.
Nope. We're going to skip over the Jill Biden cabinet meeting. It's a kind of funny story. It's not great. Who's leading our country? Yet to be determined. Only a couple more months to turn it over to a new president. Now on to debate preview. We are going to have Our first and likely only vice presidential debate on October 1st, 8 p.m. Central. It is hosted by CBS in New York City, moderated by CBS Evening News anchor Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan from Face the Nation. Not much available on the rules, to be surprising. I don't know if they're still hashing
Nerd.
them out. I gotta say, I spent at least 20 minutes today trying to figure out, are the mics going to be muted? Are we having an actual audience? What's going to go on? It's 90 minutes. It's going to be exciting. Some are saying it might be the most important vice presidential debate in history. Are we excited? I'm pretty excited.
I'm overjoyed. I'm so
Yeah.
excited. I love debates, and I love debates. Love debates.
Before we get into the tactics of it, I want to chat about the prep work that both sides are doing, namely the hashtag local angle here with the Republican side of things. Minnesota's own Tom Emmer, who's third in control or third in leadership in the House. He is playing Tim Walz in prep with Vance. I don't think it's super surprising. I think, I mean, I again spent a good chunk of my 10 plus years working in Republican politics, working for Tom Emmer. I think he is a great debater. I think he's super knowledgeable, and he spent a lot of time with Tim Walz. He knows a lot about him. They have similar upbringings, both dads, both coaches. Both have kind of that aw shucks gee whiz Minnesota type of persona at times. I think it's exciting. I wish I could be a fly on the wall. I also wish I could be a fly on the wall for the Democrat side. We have Mayor Pete. Probably not. It's probably a little rude to still call him Mayor Pete. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is standing in for Vance with prepping Tim Walz. He has been a great debater in the past as well. So I think that is both sides. I can imagine how great they are going to be. Any thoughts on the debate prep, what we're seeing, and then we'll get into kind of what we can expect.
Can I just say in the prep that when I heard that Congressman Emmer was the debate prep, I was kind of like, oh man, that's good. Because I want Walz to succeed, but I'm also, so I want Walz to win because he's going up against Vance. But the fact that Emmer's doing it, I feel like, my goodness. I mean, because we're the breakdown, our show is very much pro Emmer. And so I want him to succeed, but I also want Walz to win. So I'm torn on the prep. I'm torn in the prep.
Yes.
So I'm going to bring this spicy take. I do not like Tom Emmer, so I'm glad we have at least a balanced opinion.
Really?
Here. Oh my gosh. All right. Let me give you my honest opinion when I saw this. Tom Emmer, who couldn't message to beat Walz in 2 general elections for governor and couldn't do anything when he was chair, or what, they overlapped for 2 terms. They couldn't beat him in the South Metro in a Republican district while he was, south of the state in a Republican district. They're going to put up that guy to try and message against Tim Walz. He's never won an election against him as the chair of in Congress, when he was trying to help run against him in like the gubernatorial races when he was helping those campaigns. I'm sorry. I think that's so boring and dumb. It's like, I get,
wow.
And maybe it's just my personal distaste. I'm sorry. This is not meant to be disrespectful to Tom Emmer. I just don't think that he is a good option just because he's like a shucks, like kind of guy. It's like JD Vance is such a smug debater, and the way that he talks, I just don't think that having a guy who's lost to Tom Emmer on multiple occasions, to Tim Walz on multiple occasions, whether directly or indirectly, is the perfect fit for JD Vance to have prep him. And sorry, I know you guys all look pissed. I'm sorry.
No, Julius, I want to say something at the end, but you guys go ahead first.
Preya, go for it.
I was just going to say, you can't blame Tom Emmer for the shortcomings of actual candidates.
No. I'm not blaming
Tom.
I
don't think you can say that like his message is failing there, because Tom Emmer was very successful NRCC chair. So I will say, like, nationally, his message has been spot on. And if there is anyone in the entire country who can emulate Tim Walz probably as well, if not better than Tim Walz himself, it's probably Tom Emmer. On the flip side, I will say that Mayor Pete, and I have no qualms about calling him Mayor Pete, Becky. He will forever be Mayor Pete. That man almost got murdered on live TV by Amy Klobuchar
No.
in 2020 during the Democrats debate. So, I mean, like, if we're going to talk about like strengths of debate opponents here, Tim Walz should be the one that should be the most concerned, because Mayor Pete couldn't handle the one Minnesotan he went up against. So
Wait, okay, hold on. I really love the spiciness of this debate right now, and I'm actually enjoying it, which is why I'm responding the way I am, because you are a good intellectual opponent. You're really give me some hard jabs here. But I just want to I think, first of all, Mayor Pete did not get murdered by Amy Klobuchar. In fact, she was so pressed that he was doing better than her and debating better than her that she like attacked him on stage for being just a small town mayor. So I just want to point out that Amy
Jeff Scott,
Klobuchar was so offended by Mayor Pete's presence and ability to be a national.
Mayor Pete has only done one thing well, and that was fail upwards. I mean, the fact that you go from small town mayor to failed presidential candidate, failed statewide candidate in Indiana, out of all places, and then managed to luck into a role as transportation secretary. But you couldn't even manage the transportation in your small town in Indiana, out of all places. Like, his whole career is just quite laughable.
But I'll come back to that at another point. But
that's a whole other.
I just want to point out South Bend mayor to very serious presidential contender is pretty legit. But what I will say about the debate prep about Mayor Pete is I think he actually emulates JD Vance well, because I think they actually have like a very, I don't want this to sound rude, but like a very Ivy League way of speaking. They're very like monotone, mostly in the way that they convey themselves. They don't get overly emotional. They stay on message really well. I actually think JD Vance is very smart. Do I like him? That's a different story. But I think he's a very good debater. And I think the problem that Walz has is he needs to be able to debate someone that comes off as maybe a lot more intellectual versus
that's fair.
Yeah, so that's why that's why I actually think Pete is a very good debate prep partner.
Mayor Pete.
Mayor Pete. I call him Mayor Pete. I like.
Okay.
You just call him Pete.
Oh, Mayor Pete. Sorry.
They're besties.
But I think, but that's what I will say about Mayor Pete is that I think he emulates JD Vance very similarly, and so that's why I think that's actually a good debate partner. And I want to say, and I'll end with this: I am not coming at Tom Emmer personally, okay? But I would just like to say I don't think that he emulates Tim Walz quite as well as maybe Mayor Pete would with JD Vance. But that's just my opinion. No hate to Tom Emmer.
That is, I think, a fair opponent. And hey, we have you guys on to push back on us and each other. That's why you're here. One thing that I actually do think is what Tom Emmer will be really great at in this is, reports say that Vance has been watching previous Walz debates with a goal of going in to destroy Walz's moderate image. I think that is what he needs to do. I think that is what he certainly should go into this and paint Walz as not the moderate dad coach from rural Minnesota, but instead a far left extremist. I would say that would be my tips if I was in the room. But one thing that I think I want to chat about the kind of attitude and persona. We saw Kamala Harris be so successful at baiting Donald Trump. I would argue that Tim Walz is going to go in with the same kind of goal, to bait JD Vance, to distract him, to get him talking about the cats and dogs, to get him talking about the childless cat ladies, to get him, not only will he ask him those questions and probably the moderators too, but I think he's going to try to get him to spend time on things other than the economy, other than Walz's record and everything of that sort. On the flip side, and feel free to agree to disagree, but while Tim Walz has been very successful on the campaign trail, painting himself as this so likable, again, coach and father, which I think is going to be a strong suit. I think he's going to lean into that bio. I think he, just like Harris, is going to really lean into his time as a teacher, as a coach, and everything that he's learned, and every way he can tie that into any single policy. But what I think that Vance should do and will do is he's going to try to poke them. We have seen in multiple occasions, in particular, even just this morning in the morning take, Blois was talking about the Farm Fest debate between Scott Jensen and Tim Walz. Walz doesn't like to be pushed, and he has not been pushed very much lately because, again, lack of interviews in my perspective. But I think that this is going to be something where JD Vance is going to try to fire him up. He's going to find some of those weak points. He's going to try to fire him up, and he's going to show people that Tim Walz can be a pissed off old man as well. And that's something that I think Tom Emmer in debate prep is going to be able to emulate very well, because I love Tom Emmer, but he knows how to be a pissed off old white man when he needs to. And I think he's going to be able to show that Tim Walz side when in the prep. I think they're going to find those. They're going to have 5 different spots of topics that they're going to push them, whether it's feeding our future, whether it's the riots, whether it's tampon Tim, whatever the ridiculous
Ball
thing they want to
spots.
do. They are going to find those spots. They are going to find the weakness. And at least once, I think we're going to see a fired up, red-faced Tim Walz.
I hope we see it. I hope it happens, because I think
You hope.
I hope there's, I think it's great. I think Walz does passion and enthusiasm. I think if Walz doesn't go on the stage and lead with passion and enthusiasm and embrace it and channel it, I'll be disappointed. I think he's going to be fired up. I think he's going to be energetic. I think the coach is going to be on the stage. And this is the problem. Let me just say this to you. First of all, let me just put a pin in the Emmer conversation. I think Emmer is the absolute perfect person to do the debate for very much of the same reasons that Becky brought up. Having known Tom Emmer for a long time and have a wide variety of conversations with him over the years, Tom Emmer can be tough. He can be pointed. It's the full range of things. And I think what the most, in looking at debate prep, what I think that Vance needs to modulate on and be prepared for is Walz coming on stage and being enthusiastic. And what we've talked about, Becky, and we know this separately from our interactions with Emmer, but we've talked about Emmer's that coach. We've talked about that kind of hockey kind of coach mentality and that kind of persona that he has, that rah-rah pick-me-up type messages. That level of enthusiasm is very similar between Walz and Emmer. And so looking for someone to emulate that, I think Emmer is a great pick. The problem that I think that Walz is going to have is, now I shouldn't say the problem that Walz is going to have is I think the problem that the Trump campaign is going to have, I actually mean the exact opposite, is JD Vance is an intellect. He's intellectual. Nothing wrong with that. But I can tell you something. Are more people going to be interested in voting someone that went to Harvard or someone who's the hometown coach? And this is what I would say to you. If JD Vance is so smart, if JD Vance is such a good politician, why has he been such a failure as the VP pick? Why is he consistently messaging like he does? This guy couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat when it comes to some of his message. And so if he's so smart, if he's so skilled, why has he not succeeded? And I honestly, my expectation is that I think Vance is going to come out hard at Walz. I think Walz is going to just grab that energy and talk about, I think it's going to be much easier for Walz to get under Vance's skin than I think it is the other way around. Because I think Walz is just a loud, energized, enthusiastic political figure. And so if he's emotional on stage, if he's energized, if he's feisty, people expect that. But you know what would be interesting is, can JD Vance keep his cool? Because we certainly know he can't message very well.
And I just want to propose adding on top of that into some, and maybe expand what the truth might look like a little bit for the both of them going into that debate. So I think Michael is right. Like, Walz has to go in. One of the few times I'll say that. No, I'm just kidding. But like, you'll have to like see what I think is, when JD Vance talks about abortion, heck yeah, I want to see Tim Walz pissed. I want him to go on that stage and say, yeah, I'm pissed off that you're trying to take a woman's right to choose. I absolutely want to see that. And I think a lot of Americans are going to want to see that. And I think a lot of people who don't know the both of them are going to see this guy saying he wants, abortion to be illegal. And then this guy that says that's absolutely garbage. I want women to do whatever they want. I think Walz needs to control, but be pissed off at the right times. And I think it's going to work well for him if he can direct that passion into like relating to why he's upset about some of the policies that some of the Trump campaign and JD Vance has. On the alternate reality is, JD Vance is an intellectual, and I think that he is not going to take the bait the way Trump does. He can't, right? He can't for the sake of his own campaign. But also, I think the reality is here, and this relates back to the presidential debates. Trump does not look presidential. He's just like a guy that goes and says what he wants. I think JD Vance needs to carry the mantle of presidential looking people into that debate and say, okay, Trump is this crazy guy that says whatever he wants. Maybe JD Vance can be look presidential, vice presidential, and steer him and look very professional. And for the same way that Kamala had to look very presidential on the debate stage against Trump, which he did well, Walz needs to be the guy that sounds like I can connect with you on an everyday basis and I can understand your reality. So with that being said, I think Walz does need to be passionate. And I will say again, JD Vance is way too smart to take the bait from Walz. He's just too good at what he does. He is a good debater. He's a good speaker in general, I think. So what I think he needs to do is make himself seem relatable and intellectual and very like vice presidential, very like straight and narrow, and like just get down to the policy of it and not take the bait about things like calling, saying single cat ladies shouldn't, whatever the case may be. So I think that that's really what they need to do. And I think that I don't think this is the most important vice presidential debate ever, but I think it will carry a lot of weight for maybe people who are undecided about the two top candidates. Maybe they can see the two vice presidential and be like, I like that person, so I might just do it for that reason. So
that was a great show. Let's move on here.
I don't think so. I think we need to hear from what Ms. Preya says on her take on how Vance is going to perform and what we can expect from Tim Walz.
I agree with Julius. I have
the consensus is beautiful.
I will say in 2022, I had the pleasure of working in Ohio at the RNC and had the pleasure of being in the room with JD Vance. And I think that when you look at JD Vance as a candidate who ran for Senate in Ohio, who ran against a number of different personalities and folks from different backgrounds, he, despite some of the trouble that they had in the beginning, was able to come out on top and able to take on Tim Ryan and defeat him handedly to become senator. I think there's a real reason why his book was so popular and why he was able to get as much name recognition as he did from his book. I think that at the end of the day, JD Vance is an intellectual, but he's also a military guy, and he's a guy that grew up in abject poverty with a mom who had a drug problem and has a story unlike anything Tim Walz has had to deal with. And so I think what you're ultimately going to see here at the end of the day is somebody who can be both intellectual and can talk about issues at a very basic level. And can meet people where they're at. And I know that the JD Vance that folks are seeing right now, since he became the VP nominee, is probably not really representative of that. But I do think if that JD Vance who showed up in that Ohio Senate race against Tim Ryan shows up on that debate stage, Tim Walz is in a lot of trouble.
Some great points all around. Just a few things before we wrap up here. There was Walz was on with Rachel Maddow famously when the Taylor Swift endorsement came down. But when he was on with Maddow right after the presidential debate in September, he was talking about this and said, look, he's a Yale guy. I'm a public school teacher, so we know where he's at on that. I fully expect that Senator Vance, as a United States Senator, a Yale law guy, he'll come well prepared. Is this setting expectations a little bit that he might? Yeah, Michael, you're nodding along.
Absolutely setting expectations. I think there's an expectation. And I will just say to you, I think I don't think people vote for president based on who the vice presidential pick is. I do think it complements. I will also say to you, though, that I do think, and we can talk about it later point, I think some of that polling is dated because more information is coming to voters. We know more about elections than we've known in the past. There's more information. We're literally doing a podcast right now talking about the vice presidential debate. So I think that there may be some new polling on that we should look at sometime down the road. But I do think he's setting expectations. I also will say this to you. If you look at polling by every available measure, JD Vance is polling less than Tim Walz. Tim Walz's favorabilities are higher. Tim Walz is and so he's been more value added. JD Vance, and I agree with Preya. I don't want to pound on the guy too much, but there has been a lot of criticism about his selection. There's been a number of stories about whether he was going to be replaced on the ticket. And so the JD Vance that Preya is talking about has really not entered into the stage, is really not a part of the national discussion. But I do hear a number of stories of people talking about that. I think the debate is significant because I think that JD Vance needs to make up some ground with Walz. And so I think Walz has I think JD Vance has certainly a lot to lose in this debate. In falling back, I think he has to perform. I think the expectation is that JD Vance has to hit it out of the park. And so I do think the expectations on him.
Do we think so Kamala Harris over the weekend said that she agreed, let's do another CNN debate in October. Do we think that if Vance performs poorly, that would change Trump's mind for a second debate? Preya, no?
No. No way.
Julius?
I'm tempted to say no, right? But it's like if your ticket both does really bad in the debates or is perceived as really bad, I don't know how you recover from that without doing another debate. But my general belief is that probably likely not.
Michael?
You answered the question. You asked the question in a great way. I don't think it does, but I still believe that there's a possibility that there's another debate. I think it's too enticing of a stage for Trump to totally pass on. And so I think there's still a chance that there's a debate.
I think it could change his mind. I think if Vance performs and does as poorly as Trump did in the last debate, I don't think that Trump would want his ego to have that be the narrative coming out of early October. I think that he thinks that he was, it was rigged against him and whatever it was the last time around. I think that I could see it changing his mind. Whether he would say it was the reason it changed his mind, I don't know, but I could see a poor Vance performance leading to another presidential debate. So, wrapping up our favorite topic of the week, football, CBS Pick'ems League. I had another rough week. However, I am only just trailing. I am tied for second place. Michael, yes, you are on top. We are very glad. Preya, we're getting you in this next year. Julius, I gotta throw Julius under the bus a little bit though. You're down there. I mean, you're tied for sixth. There's a number of you, but
I was tied for third. I had a rough week like you. We have a lot of football left. So
man, this week was a lot of close games.
it was
Not
so
for me.
rough.
It wasn't.
Okay, all right. Well,
you got two more points than us.
yeah.
Well, it's still two more. I mean, and Preya, if next season you have to join the Pick'em League. And it's great. Yeah, no, I'm winning. I also won a big in my family fantasy football league. I got to rub it into my brother-in-law. I won on a last second touchdown last night. Big win. Never doubted myself for a second, and so I'm a double winner this week.
So proud
I
of
feel
you. Great job.
I'm just happy that Becky can get her picks in.
I am doing great. 3 for 3. Let's
Tell
keep
yourself
it going. This week is my week. My dog behind me knows that we're wrapping up here shortly. Before Michael does closing, I just want to give one last pitch, mintpost.com/festival. Join us on Saturday, promo code breakdown. Hope to see you there.
I just want to say in closing one last time, Preya, Julius, Becky, thank you so much for doing this. This is one of the highlights of, I just absolutely love doing this podcast. And Preya and Julius, you guys throw the heat. And I'm going to tell you something. It's just wonderful to see. You guys are at the top of your game. I hope you always know that you're welcome back. We'll definitely invite you to come back. But I just want to thank you for being a part of this discussion because it is so important in this election cycle that people talk and people disagree. And yes, Preya, I make faces sometimes when you say things, but that's because I care and because you're saying things that are important and I disagree. But I'll work on that because I guarantee you my mom is watching and she'll tell me that I need to work on that. But I just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for this opportunity and also to you, Becky, okay? Really appreciate doing this. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Oh, I'm screwing this up. I want to thank everyone for listening to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show us some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform where you listen. You can also leave a review or follow us across all social media platforms at BB Breakpod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back soon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye.